What's your reaction to the idea that no other element matters in a story if there's no conflict?
I think that is very true. And I think people misunderstand conflict. Conflict doesn't have to be people punching each other in the face on the boardwalk, as I used to say. Conflict is person versus time, person versus the vision of themselves, their vision of themselves versus the reality of being themselves. Some of the greatest movies I've ever seen, the conflict is so subtle that you can't even identify the villain. It's just a person versus time, So, yeah, I would say that that's an accurate statement.
How do you create conflict?
Create conflict is, as Jen Grisanti, I don't know if you've ever interviewed her before. I love her.
She's amazing.
She's wonderful. But she talks a lot about wounds, the character's wounds, and those identify the things that they are dealing with and coping with even now, about how do I resolve this thing that happened to me so long ago that it's practically in my DNA. And conflict is about what that person cares about putting behind them. And it's like, sure, it's the guy who shot my paw, but it's also, I'm going to lose my house if I can't come up with $2,000 to pay back taxes or like some other thing. There are some things that are more visually interesting than others, but good conflict can be defined in a much broader way than I think most people think about it.
What is meaningful conflict versus conflict that doesn't matter?
For me, meaningful conflict is something that resonates with the character individually. Like a Bond film is a totally different thing. It's like, if I don't go here, these missiles are going to do this and everybody's going to die. That bores me to death because I've seen it. I've seen it and seen it and seen it again. And what matters to him personally is very rarely on screen. Like sometimes, it's, his daughter that he doesn't know is his daughter or whatever the plot of the last Bond film was. But if it's not organic to the person and their history and their life, it doesn't register to me. It's the authenticity of that conflict. We all understand what it is to be emotionally connected to something, but just like some relentless, unmotivated bad guy that has to be stopped is not super interesting. And you very rarely walk out of a theater like crying because of the resolution to a conflict that involves somebody who's that cut and dried.
Well, some of the best villains, though, are ones that don't reveal themselves at first.
Well, every Darren Aronofsky film that's ever been made has always got a huge element of personal conflict in there, which is why they work most of the time.
What do people get wrong about conflict?
People get wrong in thinking that conflict has to be noisy and easily registers. It's very easy to put two people in a situation where they argue and then it escalates into this terrible thing. But if there's some kind of a history there, and some kind of a wound that is motivating everything, I think that's much better quality conflict.
What if someone gets a note that says there's not enough conflict?
Well, that's a tough one. It usually comes in the guise of, what are the stakes? All stakes really are is the sense that there is conflict that needs to be resolved. So stakes, it's a very complicated note to get stakes in one word because you have to figure out how to make it personally important to somebody. And that's when you have to go back in and do the interview where someone has to give you a bite like, I entered this thing 3 years ago and I lost, and it's just, I'm not going to lose it this year to this person who's going to do this for the first time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've taken what's at stake for that person individually into account, making that conflict personal. And we all know what it is to feel like to lose to somebody we don't like who doesn't have a history. Everybody I know has one story about some unqualified person that leapfrogged over them and got a job. That's personal, and that matters. Just as an example.
Troy, can you illustrate for us through your work ways to build conflict?
I talked about it earlier in the interview with Flipping Out as the great example with Jeff Lewis, who I adore. He is a wonderful person with a great personality. But again, his OCD presented a lot of challenges. And it was important that we set that up, but we can't just have a guy sit down and say, Well, you know, I'm very hard to please because I'm very specific about things. So there were lots of little things in the episode. He turns to somebody who's working for him and he says, "You're picking up the lunch order?" "Yes." "Okay, 2 things. No onions. And to drink, I want 85% Sprite, 10% fruit punch, 5% this. If they don't have Sprite, I want 80% this, 20% this, and 5% this." And it's like, he's like, who on earth is precise about basically making a suicide, which is what we called it when I was a kid, which is just run up and just put a little Mountain Dew in this and a little fruit punch and a little of this, and you've created something. He's so precise about what he wants that there is no logical reason why his needs can't be fulfilled. The conflict is within him because he can't be happy until things go exactly according to the way he wants them to go. And that helps you identify with him and his conflict. And more than once, you'll look at the TV and go like, why can't you just do what he asked you to do? Like when something goes wrong, even when you would imagine that he's going to be the villain, you're like, all he wants is this thing. You know, why is it so hard for him to have what he wants? Which is a whole other deal. But that's where I think, you know, personal conflict is important. Because, you know, and he doesn't want to be yelling at people. It's just a byproduct of him not being able to have the basically very simple thing that he could have if the world paid attention to instructions or anybody listened to him.
Sure. So you're setting up these little sort of landmines, not
Yes.
the big ones, but just little baby ones going forward.
Yes, and those things all escalate because there's going to be a time where what he wants matters and he's not going to get it, and it's going to be the worst thing that ever happened.
Hence, he'll flip out.
Yeah.
And so is the audience invested in, oh, here's the little one, okay, and then it's going to get bigger.
If you don't have a villain that you can identify with, and this is where the Bond films have been right for a long time, is there's always some motivation that the villain has for being the villain. Like, well, you know, this happened to me and my vision of the world is like this because that would resolve the problem that I see in the world. And you can identify with them because you understand that, like, yes, they're maniacs that want to blow everything up, but they want to blow it up because there's something that happened to them and that they can't get through unless they wipe life off of this island or whatever his motivation is. That works because you feel for this villain. Like, here is a wounded person who is trying to get through life like we all are. They're just doing it in a really hazardous and crappy, scary way.